Okay, now we'll go to questions from the broadcast press. Who do we have here first? Yes, sir, if you could stand up and introduce yourself before you ask the question. You've got the roving mic.
Hi, thanks. Andy Bell, 5 News. Just to be clear from what you've just said, if that family that we've seen in the last 48 hours, if they had made it into Greece, if a policy was in place that you would want, they would have been sent back and told, you're not allowed to apply for asylum here. Is that what would have been the result if the policy was in place?
Well, in fact, that family had come from Turkey, a NATO member and a relatively safe country. And it's desperately sad. It's desperately sad that the pull factors were so great to make them want to leave what is a relatively safe country.
But under your policy that you would like to see, that would have been the result. If they'd have arrived, you'd have said you cannot apply on
if the European Union had the right policy, people would know they would not be accepted by coming across the water, just as the Australians dealt with this problem, and that would stop the drownings.
Next. Yes, sir.
Jason Farrell, Sky News. Do you agree with the Hungarian Prime Minister that the refugee problem is Germany's problem?
I think Germany have exacerbated the crisis, the migrant crisis, I think I'm going to call it. I think Chancellor Merkel has exacerbated that this week in a manner that I think is very dangerous. And I think that, what we saw at that train station, as I say, almost beginning to look a little bit like a stampede, is a very, very undesirable outcome.
Is it their problem to deal with, which is the question?
This is a European Union common asylum policy. We are opted out of it. I would love Mr. Cameron to tell them where they're going wrong. Perhaps he will. I think Germany have made the problem worse. They're members of Schengen. Whatever happens, Germany is going to continue to get the lion's share of people who set foot on European soil. I mean, I have to be honest, I don't see the European Union changing this policy. And I remember Mr. Juncker in May saying, well, we have to have a burden-sharing agreement to share out 40,000 people with the member states of the European Union. This week, he's upped that figure to 160,000. And please don't think, even if there is a distribution policy that gets agreed, and that's beginning to look pretty unlikely, given the attitudes of Hungary, Slovakia, and other countries, even if that is agreed, that may solve the problem now, but what about in 3 months' time, or 6 months' time, or a year's time, or 2 years' time? And that, I think, is the problem. That however much the European Union's policy is based on the thought of helping people, I don't think it's attracting genuine refugees. I think it's attracting a very large number of economic migrants. And just how many million in the end becomes acceptable? I mean, the UNHCR's figures say there are 59 million people in the world today seeking refugee status. It is a massive global problem.
Robin Brandt, BBC News. Can I just ask you on the migrant issue, a personal question really. You're a father of a very young daughter. Just please tell us, you personally, what you thought when you saw that photograph. Some people cried, others didn't. Secondly, on the issue that we're here for today, the EU tour, do you agree with a very senior donor to another No campaign that's been set up recently? He told me the other day he thinks that all these campaigns will have folded into one by Christmas.
Okay. Well, on the first issue, yes, you're right. I'm a parent of a young daughter. How did I feel when I saw the photograph? Well, horrified. Horrified that this is happening. I suspect if I'd been shown a photograph of the back of that lorry in Austria, I probably would have been even more horrified. But I genuinely think and believe that Chancellor Merkel, compounding the pull factors this week, is more likely to make us see more of those photographs. And I think that's what we should be trying to stop. As far as the No campaign is concerned, look, the fact there are a couple of groups out there bidding to get the official No designation, I think it's very good. It's very healthy. I believe in competition. It sort of hopefully spurs each other on. What we've done is, for the UKIP conference at the end of this month, we've invited both groups to come to the conference, to speak, to say what they're up to say where they're going. and we'll try and get them both to stay for dinner. And you never know, the UKIP conference might be a good way of bringing everyone together.
Stick with broadcast for now. Any more broadcast?
Mr Farage, Stuart McDill, Reuters TV. Australia exports its migrants to third world countries in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Where would you export UK migrants to?
Well, we're not talking about exporting migrants. We're talking about stopping economic migrants coming in unnecessary numbers by having proper border checks, by making sure that people who come to work here have a job to go to, have sufficient medical insurance for the first couple of years in the country, and are producing us evidence of whether they have a criminal record or not. And if you do that properly, then your question becomes not relevant.
Okay, I'll move to print. Who do we have here? Yes, if we can.
Hi, Mr Farage. It's Emily Ashton from BuzzFeed. You spoke about Jeremy Corbyn in your speech. I'm just wondering, do you think Jeremy Corbyn is actually attracting former UKIP voters? And have you spoken to him or tried to contact him about this campaign?
No, I haven't. I think he's rather busy at the moment, and I thought, and probably enjoying himself, having the time of his life, I'd have thought. What do I think the effect of Jeremy Corbyn will be on the UKIP vote or the Labour vote? This is what I think. I think once Corbyn has won, there's almost no point voting Green in Britain. Almost no point at all. I mean, you know, they've got their man, haven't they? You know, North London, bicycles, non-drinker, all that sort of stuff. So, doesn't sound very much like me, does it? But there we are. No, I mean, I think that what Corbyn will do for the Labour vote is I think he will pick up the Green vote, and I think he will, funnily enough, as UKIP has done, start to pick up a younger type of voter who otherwise wouldn't vote for anybody. So the idea that the Labour vote will just collapse because Corbyn is there is not necessarily right. However, I do think there's a chunk of the old Labour vote that will now find UKIP even more attractive than it did back on May the 7th as a result of Jeremy Corbyn being the leader, and particularly given some of his associations in the past with people who, you know, you wouldn't necessarily want to take home to have tea with mum with. So I actually think overall, I think the Labour vote won't hemorrhage in quite the way that is being predicted. I think it's quite good for UKIP. His problem, of course, is not going to be out in the country. His problem is going to be in Westminster, leading a party with virtually no one supports him, and that's going to be his problem.
Yes, going behind.
Hi, Ben Riley-Smith from The Telegraph. Two quick questions. The first one, there's been a debate about numbers. Yvette Cooper suggested 10,000 refugees should be taken by Britain. Do you have a specific figure of refugees you think Britain should take? And secondly, you seem to indicate that you think ISIL is going to take advantage of the migrant crisis to get into Europe and come and try and undermine Britain. Do you really believe that? And if so, can you elaborate?
Right, on the first question, yeah, I mean, Yvette Cooper, it's a bit rich, isn't it, for Labour, former Labour cabinet ministers to talk about numbers, given what they did to the British population during their time in office. Look, I suggested in 2013 a few thousand. I haven't got a specific number, but it does seem to me, given that we do have an annual flow of refugees coming into Britain in any way, that it will not be difficult for us to accommodate a few thousand people. Do I think the overall number should go up from 25,000 a year, roughly where we are? No, I don't, until we sort out our borders and get a proper immigration policy in place, and then we'll be freer and more politically willing as a country to help those who are genuine asylum seekers. Your second question was a bit odd. You said as if I'm making it up about ISIS. Look, we've already seen the photographs of one of the suspects from the museum massacre, you know, landing on the beach in Italy, sort of crying hallelujah, isn't it wonderful I'm here. We have the Libyan government telling us that they're worried that this tide of people is being exploited by extremists, and even the former UN ambassador from America, John Bolton, said this week that it's perfectly clear how ISIS are exploiting this crisis. And I think that is a very, very genuine worry.
I also think, just to add to that, that the oil-rich Gulf states should be sharing the responsibility as well. I mean, you know, you've got the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait and others, and they're doing absolutely nothing. It's time that they man up and do something about this crisis. Next. Yes.
Owen Bennett, Huffington Post. Just two questions for you, Nigel. Andy Burnham suggested yesterday one way to stop the pull factor would be going directly to the camps in Turkey and bringing people over directly from there to Britain. The other thing, Yvette Cooper suggested councils coming forward and taking in 10 refugee families. Would you support UKIP's council that it runs, Thanet, taking in 10 refugee families?
Well, I think there are 1.8 million people on the current social housing list in this country. So I think we'd be slightly careful about that line of argument. You know, that's not to say we don't want genuine refugees, but as I said earlier, you know, I don't really think we should be taking lessons, particularly from Yvette Cooper, about this subject. As far as, well, from what I've heard this morning, the Prime Minister, I think, was hinting that as part of our annual refugee, or does he mean more, I don't know, but as part of our refugee numbers, that we might actually go to the camps and find people who are people genuinely fearing persecution. And if that's the way the British government's going to do it, then I think that's a very good lesson for the rest of the European Union to absorb. That is the only sensible way to do it. I would hate to see us encouraging more people to cross the Mediterranean.
Okay, I'll take two more questions. Over the, shall I come to you next? Just lady here over the back.
Gary Pear from the Daily Mail. Are you still ruling out the No campaign? Are you not the best person for the job? And if not, would you consider a job share with Jeremy Corbyn? And are you concerned about divisions in the different No campaigns?
Of course, though. I mean, look, there are differing visions within the Yes campaign. You know, there are some in the Yes campaign who will say we're members of the European Union and support the status quo. As I said earlier, there are others in the Yes campaign, like Sir Richard Branson and Tony Blair, who want a yes vote to be a springboard for us to join the euro, to play our full part in a European army. So both sides of an argument, you know, will have different emphases on this. Look, I'm not ruling out the No campaign or the KNO campaign. I'm not ruling anybody out. As I've said, we will work with anybody. What we simply have not been able to bear is the level of inaction when the Yes side are going at full pelt, and that's why we're going out today. We've got these 300 meetings booked, and if other people from across the political spectrum want to come out and share those platforms with us, that is fine by us.
Yes.
Lucy Fisher from The Times. Mr Farage, many people say the campaign to leave the EU will be won or lost by winning the votes of middle ground, undecided voters. What do you say to people who claim that you and UKIP will drive away rather than appeal to those people?
Well, there's a very interesting attempt today, ahead of this conference, to try, by sort of one or two soft Tories, I think, who rather fancy their chances, to try and, I mean, one or two of the blogs this morning, new poll shows that UKIP puts off voters, Farage puts off voters, and I would just remind you that that poll was conducted between the 8th and the 11th of May. That poll didn't even mention my name, and I think that as we are outside of the party political battle that takes place in a European election, and even more intensely takes place in a general election, you know, I think the idea that UKIP puts off, I mean, if people are put off by what I've heard this morning, well, I can't do much about that. But I would suspect that the majority of people who are open-minded, who heard where we stand on this issue, will actually agree with us. And far from us trying to bad-mouth or push people away, we want to try and bring people together. You know, I accept not everyone is going to think UKIP's fantastic or I'm fantastic. I accept that, of course. But actually, that's why we need, you know, the centre-left, whether it's Corbyn or somebody else, appealing to those voters as well. And I do actually think, I genuinely think, that I think this referendum can be won by our side of the argument. I think what we have to do is we have to show that the risk of staying in the European Union, given all of its problems and given its massive policy failures in many areas, is greater than the risk of us returning to self-government. That's our challenge. That's what we have to do. We have to overturn the status quo. But I think the EU is getting things so badly wrong that the opportunity is there to do it.
I'd also like to remind everyone why we're here. We're not here because of pressure from conservative backbenchers who've achieved nothing for 30 years. We're here because of UKIP. That's the reason why we've got the referendum. And to suggest that Nigel Farage shouldn't play a part in it, I think is akin to taking off the top goal scorer in the World Cup final and substituting him.
Oh,
it doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Paul. That's great.
Oh, well, it makes no sense.
I'm really chuffed now. Thank you.
Okay, last question. Any more questions from the print? Okay, we'll close the press conference today, but I want to close it by saying this. Nigel mentioned an action. We know that this campaign will be won by the side which gains momentum. And we aim to gain that momentum and a head start for the Leave side because we understand in politics the early bird catches the worm. That's why we have 300 meetings booked already all over the country between now and December, and I guarantee you'll be hearing a lot more from us in the future. Thank you.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.